Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of GDDV 106 Development Concepts. My name is Kasanis. All right, guys, we are moving into week 7 of this particular series. Week 7, if you were sitting in my class, we'd be moving on to week 7, and we're moving along pretty darn well. We've covered a whole ton of stuff. This week, we're going to start looking at the idea of asset development. We're going to start to put assets into the games that we're creating. Particularly today, in this episode, we're going to look at the idea of Getcomponent. This is something we've already discussed briefly in another episode, but I think it's pretty darn important, and I'm going to give it an episode of its own. All right, let's get started. So, Getcomponent. We are going to be looking at a number of different versions or uses of Getcomponent. Getcomponent, Getcomponent and Parent, and Getcomponent in Children. We're going to be looking at all three of these, and we're gonna at least be talking about all three of these. And really, what we're using them for is communication purposes across various objects. That's my plan. We're going to be using the Getcomponent to demonstrate the creation of a pickup or a power-up of some kind to create a game asset that we'd place within the game and allow our player to interact with that particular game object. That's our plan. And it's important to note that we'll be using it in that particular case to allow us to access a public function on a script. That's what we're going to use it for. So as an example, let's say we had a character and we had a pickup that was a bomb, and the character ran into the bomb. Well, the bomb is going to access a public function on a script on the character to determine how much damage is done and to track health. That's what it's going to do. And that's kind of what we're going to be using it for in the circumstances for this week's education, building an asset like that. Now, it's important to note, and we've already seen this, that GetComponent can be used to find any type at all that you desire, any type of component that you desire. We've already seen this when we took a look at the creation of input and allowing our player to move, where we set the velocity of our rigid body. We first went in, found our rigid body, had a reference to our rigid body, and set the velocity. That's exactly what Getcomponent can do. Another example here, animator, myanim equals myObject.getComponent, animator, open close brackets, semicolon. And what this is going to do is it's going to look for an animator on my object. That's what it's doing. It'll then return a reference and store that reference in myanim. So we have it within the variable and we can access that animator anytime we wish. That's really what it does. All right. So we're going to be using it, like I said, to access public functions today in this week, but we're going to actually just talk about it in general terms right now. Gameobject.getComponent returns the first component encountered using a depth first search of type found on the Gameobject. Type meaning the type of component you're searching for. This will look on the object itself for that particular component. That's what Getcomponent does. It looks on the object itself in that particular hierarchical layer for that particular component. Gameobject.getComponent and Parent works very similarly, but instead of only searching within that particular object, it will also search in all of the parent objects as well. Again, it will only return the first component it encounters, though. So the reference that will be returned is the very first component encountered, regardless of what layer that it's located on, either the object itself or any of the parent objects. Similarly, GetComponent in Children will search for a particular type or a particular component. It will search the object itself and then use a depth first search to find the component in any of the children objects as well. So it'll search downwards in the hierarchy. And that's what they do. So there's really a bunch of different options here depending on how well you know the hierarchy. You can use one or the other of these particular functions. In all cases, there is also a version that will return all of the components that we're looking for, all of the type components that we're looking for. Particularly, we have Gameobject.getComponents, and again, it's searching for a type, and it will return an array of all of the type that it finds within that same object. Gameobject.getComponents in Parent, again, looking for a type, and it will return all of the objects, an array of all of the components that it finds within the object and in any of the parent objects. Lastly, we've got ourselves Gameobject.getComponents in Children. of type. And once again, we are searching for a type of component. We will search for all of those components, return all those components in the object or in the child objects of the original object as well. So in each case, we get an array of all of those components. So in the case of a public function, how are we going to use this particular function? So basically, once we've returned the reference to whatever type we are looking for, whatever type of component we're looking for, we then have access to any of the variables or functions that are located within that particular component. When we talk about the idea of a script, when we return a reference to a script, we will have access to a number of different things that Unity gives us for free. But more importantly, in my opinion, is the ability to access any of the public functions available on that script. And I've already given you the idea of health. So in this particular case that I have here, combat manager my combat equals my sword.component combat manager. And what that particular line of code is doing is it's searching for a script called combat manager. I'm assuming that combat manager is located on that particular object. Once we have a reference in my combat, we can then access any of the public functions. So as an example, if we had a public function called add damage, we could then access add damage and operate and actually access it and actually operate add damage. So my combat.add damage now becomes available to us. We will have a list of all of the public functions available. So in this particular case, if we had a sword that was going to cause damage to a player or whatever, and we wanted to add the damage, this is how we'd go about doing it. If we did not need to maintain a reference, if we wanted to search for that reference every single time, we could absolutely say mycombat.getComponent combat manager.add damage. We have access to it in a single line of code. In the first example that we've got there, however, we do maintain a reference to my combat, and in future use, we could access any of the public functions on my combat again. If we use a second line here, the additional line, or where we didn't keep a reference, obviously we'd have to go back each time and do the get component to try and find that object before we could access any of the public functions. All right, so let's go ahead right now and take a look at the use of Getcomponent. And I just want to take a really quick look at it in Unity, and we'll just go back and look at the idea where we found our rigid body. Okay, let's head over to Unity. Okay guys, here we are inside of Unity, and I'm back in Dev Concepts. I've added myself a brand new scene called Week 7. And I'm not going to belabor this point because we've already gone over it. I'm just going to go over it one more time very briefly so you have the idea. In a future video, what we'll do is we'll actually go through and create ourselves an asset that we pick up, and we'll utilize the actual communication between objects as well. So for now, let's just take a look quickly at if I hit play, we've got the same thing we had in the previous episodes where we got a head that can move around, right? And let's take a really quick look at how that head moves around. If I go into Kasana's happy head, I head down into my input script, and I open it up. Here we go right now. Our input script, what we've got here is we've got a number of different things. What I'm really interested in is right down here, my RB get component rigid body. So in order to access that rigid body, all I've done is I've declared myself a rigid body 2D and named the variable RB. Down here in the start function, I use the get component to search for the rigid body on my Kasana's character, on that character itself. I store that reference directly here in my RB, and later on I am able to utilize my RB to do something particular. In the case of both velocity or force, I'm using my RB to set particular options available. MyRB.velocity, and I set it, or MyRB.addForce. Because I have a reference to that rigid body, I can access any of the functionality available to that rigid body. All right, super simple. If we go back and we take a look at Kasana's head, right here, Kasana's happy, we've got ourselves a rigid body located right here in the same hierarchy layer. So it was no need to either use a get component in parent or get component in children. All right, super straightforward. It does a lot of amazing things, guys. We're going to use it throughout the rest of this week's episodes at least. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, let me know down below with a thumbs up, and if you didn't, a thumbs down is perfectly fine. These videos are for my students. They're not watching them. They should be. I hope you guys are watching them and enjoying them. I hope they're helping you guys out. All right, thumbs up, thumbs down, comments down below, and if you haven't done so, please take a few seconds to subscribe. Have yourselves a wonderful day, everyone.